Thanks for listening to the podcast. We've got a ton of great content that covers the full journey of deploying a branded employee app. Go to staffbase.com, click on resources, and select Employee App Guide. That's it. Best wishes and back to the show. Hello and welcome. Today we are talking with HR advisor and founder of Inspire Human Resources, Jaime Klein. Jaime, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thrilled that you asked.
We are going to have a really interesting conversation about something that I think, at least in the past couple of months, has been something that has been very active in our news cycle. And we really want to just to touch on where this whole conversation started between you and I, was that you recently published a wonderful article, which we'll put in the show notes, entitled How to Proactively Plan for transgender inclusion. And I found it really relevant and a powerful approach to the tactical and proactive planning that is needed when working towards a workplace that welcomes diversity and inclusion. And I just wanted to start right off by, if you could introduce yourself a little bit more, and also just let me know what inspired you to go with this.
Yeah, well, thank you. For years I've been working with clients. I founded the firm back in 2007, and we do kind of everything HR under the sun. We do this thing called diversity and inclusion. It's one of the 10 things that we do. We do learning, training, coaching, etc. And about a couple of years ago, several clients within a short period of time asked the question around how to make it as comfortable as possible for someone who was in transition deal with the bathroom. And it kind of started this whole, what do we do with the bathroom? And working in Midtown Manhattan, most firms don't have lots of extra wings of their office space. So the solve was, well, let's just take an office supply room that we don't need because we're not printing out things anymore. And let's just make that into a bathroom, right? So it kind of started with that conversation. And so that is how it evolved. But in working with organizations, I found that it's going way beyond the bathroom, right? It's really how do we help folks that are in transition or have identified as transgender just to feel comfortable. We spend as humans roughly half of our waking hours at work, more than we do it often at home with family and friends. So we better be comfortable and productive while we're there. So that's really the genesis of how it all started.
Wonderful. And just to back it up a little bit, could you tell us a little bit more about Inspire and your organization and what you hope to accomplish and just the types of folks that you work with?
Sure. So we advise organizations, really helping them think about the future of work. 50% of Google, for example, is a contingent workforce. 50% of Google is made up of, folks like us that do interim HR work or McKinsey's or tech support outsourcing, et cetera, this kind of future of work. So we've been at this for about 12 years. We help organizations by providing fractional talent to either to help them on any HR issue that they're tackling. As I was saying before, whether it be training, coaching, compensation, benefits, diversity and inclusion, leadership development, org design, et cetera. And we have folks in our team who work on a part-time basis, each with various expertise, and help either to fill in for a parental leave if a position's open, or help a lean HR department get a bunch of work done. And in the last 2 years, we've just been seeing an uptick in a request to get the D&I, the diversity and inclusion strategy, right, and specifically help all traditionally marginalized groups just feel more comfortable at work and how to be allies for those groups.
That's wonderful. And we're going to talk a lot about that because I think, especially from the article that you wrote, it just really perked my interest. And, we talked a lot to communicators. We talk a lot to HR, to PR, to marketers, to leadership, and all of them have different types of information that they're trying to share. And this is sort of at, if you're trying to provide an example of trying to do the right thing, trying not to offend, trying to really figure out a way to communicate something, this is a challenge. This is really a very interesting topic. And actually in your article, I'm just going to actually read it directly so I don't mess it up because it was a good quote. The quote was, "The most important thing you can do for an employee is to find out what they need to be themselves at work." And so, that really, I felt that just captured the heart of what so many organizations are trying to do. And so we work with a lot of folks, like I mentioned, in all these different realms. And so how do you recommend that someone approaches this without doing more harm than possibly good?
It's a great question. And I just want to call out, I think since the rise of the Me Too moment, I think that
Mhm.
there has just been such a focus to help make sure that we just check in and are aware of blind spots for any marginalized group, whether it be, Me Too raised a lot of issues about, gender equity. Obviously, the unfortunate history of our country is that, people of color were traditionally marginalized. It's like this thing is Americans will never quite get over. Slavery was just so, we live in a society where we're always having this heightened awareness. But this moment in time, I think specifically for the transgender community is here. And it is happening in social media and advertising, et cetera. And then we get to work. So it's really, I think, about asking someone, what can we do to support you? Because the role of an organization, the role of the leader at the end of the day is to ensure that they can have a productive workforce so that those resources, right? We're not machines. We're not fine tuning the wiring on a machine. We're making sure that the humans, the human capital, if you will, are having their most productive day. We all have a little bit of discretionary effort that we can give or not give to a piece of work. And there's a thing in our mind that's always looking to check in with how much discretionary effort we want to give. And the reality is, if you feel comfortable at work, you're going to do your best work. And to build on what you said, if you are distracted by this stuff, we can't be productive. So I'm just a fan of being really transparent and just saying, I want to make sure that this is comfortable for you. What pronoun, just remind me again, what pronoun do you prefer? Like, it can be that simple. Just refresh my memory. It can be that simple as just a conversation starter, to help that person who's transgender just have the most productive, comfortable day. And also, as a leader, you signal to your employees, it can be that basic of an ask.
So really, if I was just to sort of compress what you were saying, or put it into a little bucket,
Hmm.
it would be just treat people with respect and just be mindful, and hopefully the way that you convey your genuine curiosity to do the right thing,
Hmm.
transparent in that sense, could probably
Hmm.
be the path to the best possible experience.
Hmm. And I think, we can draw on other things in our lives. Everyone has a very full life outside of work. People might be caregivers, they might be going through a separation in their marriage, they might have a child with a disability. I mean, people have all these different things. And it is exhausting to come to work and pretend like you don't have a thing going on at home that is breaking your heart, or distracting. And I think that we all have things that we can tuck away as we get into that elevator bank and go up to the 32nd floor. But someone who's in transition can't hide that. So I think that we need to create space for them to talk about this other thing that they're working through, and it's a positive experience for them, and they want it to feel, they want work to be an extension of the way that they're moving through the world.
I think you really tapped into something that is I'm so curious to learn about, how you experience or how you work with this, is
Hmm.
that you started to tap into that there are just so many different um, other elements. You mentioned Me Too. You were talking about transgender. We're talking about
Yes.
there's other things like gender equality, pronouns,
Hmm.
sexual orientation. Um,
Hmm.
and then you also started talking about how some things are, you might want to tuck it away, and it can get really overwhelming really quickly. And so,
Sure.
I guess, from a corporate communications and
Hmm.
from a hiring standpoint,
Hmm.
do you find it more productive to focus on the larger picture at hand, or maybe approach each separate as their own individual entity? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're advising so many companies now who really want to get this whole umbrella right of diversity and inclusion. And just by definition, diversity is often getting people, it's like the numbers, it's getting the right talent in the door. Actually, let me take a step back. All the research out of Harvard shows that if you have stronger diversity in your workforce and around a leadership table, you get better results, you get better productivity, you get less groupthink. So the research is there. And there is a little thing in our brain as humans that searches for sameness. It's a like survival mechanism that's hardwired. So if you yourself grew up going to sleepaway camp and in an interview you strike up a conversation with someone that went to sleepaway camp and you bond over that, you might just assume that that person is a perfect fit, even though they don't have the right skill set, but they remind you of your fabulous self. So you want to bring them in. And I think that what we need to do is have some of these structural things in place so that we just don't surround ourselves with people that remind us of our fabulous selves, because all the research out of Harvard and Deloitte shows that the best results don't happen. So diversity, the D in D&I, diversity is getting the right people in the door. And some companies like Amex or J&J or Pepsi, they have like scorecards or metrics, or they really measure it. Goldman has a policy that you need to have 2 qualified diverse candidates for every open role. Like, so companies have these things. And so the D is getting people in the door. The I, inclusion, is about people feeling comfortable when they get there. And then, it's like, how do you get them to stay and find people that they feel are part of their tribe, that they can be their authentic selves with, and then not just stay, but like dance to their own music. Like, how do you get folks to stay, especially in this economy, and millennials like to move jobs more than the previous generation. So there's this confluence of factors. So when I advise companies on the overall D&I strategy, I always start with, what is your business case? And what are you doing as a leadership team in words and body language and action to show that you believe in an organization that everyone has, where everyone has the space to be treated equally and do their best work, period. Period. And all the research shows that if you have a leadership team where everyone is white, straight, male, and over 40, you just are not going to get the best ideas around the table. And I just bring that up because, as an example, historically, leadership teams in our country have fit that profile. So when you have someone who's brilliant, who's trans, or who's Latina, sometimes there's this whole conversation about, well, will they feel comfortable? Will they fit in? And the reality is that we need to, as leaders, make sure that there is absolutely an opportunity for those people to be onboarded, to be brought in as senior leaders, because that's the type of diversity of thought and life experience that we need around a table to make great decisions. And that's a whole mindset shift that has really unfolded over the last long period of time. But I think that there's been an acceleration of all that. I think since Me Too, it's brought so many overdue conversations to the forefront. And what I say to people that traditionally have not been in marginalized groups, that is welcome to what people who traditionally have not been treated as marginalized, but now they have this like awareness, right? They're like, there's this like awakening. So to them, I say, welcome. Like, if you are a woman and there's this whole new awareness that to be female is to be able now to really speak your truth, that you may not have felt comfortable because you might have been made to feel, uncomfortable in a different work setting, whether, harassment, various things. So to those women, I say, thank you for speaking your truth. And now we need to use this moment to be an ally to other groups who have always felt marginalized. People, women of color, men of color, people in the trans community. Like, we need to be allies and use this moment to help everyone rise.
I really like the way that you explained the D and the I in terms of, okay, so the D is saying we're welcoming you in. We
Yes.
want everyone to come in, and the
Yes.
I is what is going to keep you here and
Yes.
be happy and feel like you're part of something.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I think that's actually very simple to understand, which is very helpful, because I think that this is such a complex category to discuss.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we all sit in these big, town hall meetings, or every company has their different situation. But for example, if you've ever been in a forum where your leadership team is like up on the stage, on the main stage, like when you're in the audience, I think it is so important that you see someone that reminds you of you, however you define you, and I think look, there are things that we can all see, if you picture like an iceberg, there's stuff above the waterline that we can all see, right? The person's skin color, the way that they present gender, etc. But there are things below the waterline. And what I've seen leadership teams do is more and more talk about how they might be the first someone on the team might be the first one in their family, the first generation to go to college, or someone might have paid their way through college, or someone might be from a different area regionally, or someone might have someone in their family who really struggles with mental health and actually took their life. And I think that those types of more like honest conversations help people in the audience to feel like, you know what, there's more of me up on that stage of that leadership team. Perhaps they might look like me because the company's more focused on that, but they've opened up and they've talked about these things that are below the waterline of the iceberg that I also relate to. And this is a company where that authentic leadership is present, and I want to stay a while. So there's so many layers to this, but what I've seen over the last 2 years is companies make more of an effort to make sure that at the leadership team level that there's more diversity around the table, and diversity can be defined in all different ways.
That's wonderful. Thank you for explaining it that way. And I think that really helps clarify the the journey that I believe that a lot of the communicators, a lot of the HR in leadership, that what they're challenged with and trying to figure out a way to go at this. And to take it even further, we were talking offline that it seemed that this past year, 2019, and June in particular, there was an outpouring of rainbows and acknowledgement. And you saw these wonderful brands that were painted in rainbows, and it was just there was just a lot of excitement around welcoming folks. I mean, if you go into Penn Station right now, Philadelphia, it says we welcome everyone, and it's really cool. Penn Station, New York has a Philadelphia advertisement, just to make sure that that's not unclear. It sounds strange, but it's wonderful that for the huge advertisement right in the middle of it. But at the same time, it's like, okay, great. So wonderful that all these companies, like, they changed their logo. They, everywhere from a social perspective, they're saying, we're here, we're welcoming. There's that D, right? There's the D. But it's one thing to be so open about welcoming, but then there's a whole other level, which is that I, which is where what are the tactical things that organizations have to really start to think about? You're going to say, not only are we welcoming, but we're providing a workplace that is going to make you continue to feel welcome, apart from, I guess, social branding, if you will.
Yep. And I love that you brought that up, because the truth is that the BTQ, or trans, community, like, the employees, they want to feel that way year round, right? Like, they want to feel that way all 12 months. So it means so much that so many companies have showed their constant support, and that is fantastic. That is such a start, and we need to find other tactical ways. So your question is, what are innovative things that organizations are doing? So one thing I think, just from the top, is to have the leadership team really deepen their understanding. So everything from unconscious bias training to forums where members of the LGBTQ community can come in and really speak about what it's like to travel through the world, so that they have more of an intimate conversation with someone who's traveling through the world that way. I think that is just really helpful to kind of create these intimate settings where people could ask questions that they might not want to do at the town hall, or might not want to do in front of their employees. But I've seen some organizations do that for their leadership team. Another strategy is to think about mechanics. So, for example, including pronoun preferences in signatures on emails. So I know several companies that do that. Tapestry, for example, that they're kind of the mashup of Kate Spade, Stuart Weitzman, and Coach. They're very focused on this. I know with Squarespace, whenever I email colleagues of mine there, their pronoun preferences are always in their email signature. And I just think that things like that are so progressive. Also making sure that there are ways that, I believe what gets measured gets done. So companies like Goldman Sachs, American Express, Salesforce, they're a leader also, they've figured out all these innovative ways, 365 days of the year, to really make sure that diversity and inclusion is part of the rating that employees get in their performance reviews. And that's always ultimately tied to compensation. So looking for ways to really have embracing of anyone from a marginalized group, helping them feel more comfortable through the entire employee life cycle, is something that gets measured. And I think that that's really impactful also.
I really like that. Yeah, start from the leadership level down, really understand what it means to the organization, and then
Mm-hmm.
find ways to make it part of your evaluation, make it part
Mm-hmm.
of and if it's going to be a 365, 24/7 type of situation,
Yeah.
um, embed it into your daily conversation, or
Mm-hmm.
you're at least make it known that this is something that people are going to be measuring you against, or
Yes.
wondering about, what is your role in this part as we participate in this, etc.
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that's really quite wonderful. So with that, I'm so curious, um, trying to be respectful of, I think the easiest example is if when I'm sitting down and I'm talking to my grandmother about
Yes.
all the different things that are happening in the world, and I'll be, the conversation can get a little confusing. It's
Yes.
just there are generations, and my grandmother's 103, bless her. She's
God
wonderful.
love her. Oh, I love this.
But
That's amazing,
so I
Jason.
figured I
Wow.
can't, there's a perfect example of like all
Yes.
the way of the pendulum is swinging.
Yes.
Here's the other side, right? So, but then you
Wow.
have organizations that have people of various different
Mm-hmm.
ages, and they could be people that have worked at the organization or the manufacturing plant for 30 years, 40
Mm-hmm.
years, etc. And hearing about this,
Mm-hmm.
all these different changes and things that you're supposed to say and
Mm-hmm.
how you have to be careful, and being it could sound really confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And so from your perspective, how does an organization start to take what you just said in that last question and start
Mm-hmm.
to actually push information out in a
Mm-hmm.
way that is, you know that is a little bit easier to comprehend without
Mm-hmm.
having to be like, well, that sounds silly, I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think it always believes I believe it always starts at the top.
Mm,
It's like any system, right? Whether it's your family of origin, at an organization, you always are looking for the alphas in life to kind of look at how they handle things. So I think what we want to do is make sure that the organization's HR team, communications team, and leadership team are all aligned, that you're looking for ways to embrace diversity through the entire employee life cycle. So think from the moment that we post a job, the way that we bring in talent, the way that we determine who gets promoted, who's in that mentoring program, who's a high potential, who gets reorganized, who gets the bad desk by the printer. No one wants a desk by the printer because people are always saying, do you know where to get more copy paper? Like, and who gets impacted by, compensation, who gets picked for discretionary bonuses, and who gets exited, right? Like the entire employee life cycle. So what we do when we work with clients is we help them really have a D&I focus on each step in the employee life cycle, and look for kind of mindsets and then just systemic things. Like, for example, let's take recruiting. We talk about organizations embracing the idea of when you when you look at a resume, considering covering up the name and the address, because you might have certain bias. We're human. We all have bias regarding an address or a name, and just truly looking at the schools, the experiences, and the accomplishments and the metrics that show, the improvement that they were able to make in their career over time. Like really looking at the basics of what someone does and not getting distracted by those pieces. So that's a quick example. Also making sure that in an interview, we teach this whole class on how to reduce bias in interviewing, and literally sitting with leaders, hiring leaders, and helping them think about what are the questions that you are asking. Are you asking them in the same way? Because if you get on the tangent about how you both went to sleepaway camp or you're both from the South, then you're not going to get to the facts of whether the person can deliver in that role, right? So looking at the entire interview process as an example of that part of the employee life cycle, but you can use that same rigor through the mentoring programs, who gets selected for reorgs, who gets the bonuses, all the comp pieces. So, I think that, again, communications, HR, and leadership team agree that they're going to look at the entire employee life cycle as a piece of it. But in terms of the age piece, I think a lot of this is around education. And I was mentioning to you in a previous conversation, there's this great tool called the Gingerbread Person. And for me, it is so straightforward. And it shows how a person can feel. So picture a gingerbread person outline. We all know what that looks like. It previously known as the gingerbread man, but a little a little arrow goes to their head that says identity. And it's how in your head you experience and define your gender based on how much you align or don't align with what you understand the options are for you to be gender. And then there's an arrow that points to the heart, right? Even your 103-year-old grandmother can understand this, right? The heart is the attraction. It's how you find yourself feeling drawn or not drawn to other people in a sexual, romantic, or other way. And it's often categorized within gender. The sex are, picture like science class when you're little. It's the chromosomes, and it points to the area of where your genitals are. And this area, the gingerbread person talks about if the physical traits, the physical traits that you're born with or develop. We think of science class like sex characteristics, and it's typically assigned to you at birth. And all of this together with this the gingerbread person, it's expression. It's how you present gender through your actions and your clothing and your demeanor or your name, and how this shows up and marries or doesn't marry social expectations. So this is a tool that we use with multi-generational teams to just talk in the most simplistic terms about how identity, attraction, sex, and expression kind of all come out. So I think it's a basic example, and there are so many tools out there, but we have found that with multi-generational teams, something as basic as a gingerbread person really is a starting point, so people understand all the components of being just around about gender identity. So I think we have to also acknowledge that your grandmother at 103, God love her, her family of origin, what was going on culturally and societally at the time that she was being raised, were so different than a Gen Z, Gen Z, it's now their third year out of undergrad, so this kind of newest generation, thinking about all the different things that were going on societally in each of their upbringings, because that often determines how they view things. So there are so many pieces that go into it, but there are certain organizations that are ahead of their time. There's a great New York Times article written recently highlighting Goldman. They actually, their managing director of Goldman Communications actually just went through transition. And when this person was going through everything, they had an expert come in and advise everything from making sure that any articles where now she is quoted had she as the pronoun, where they went ahead in advance and had a employee photo taken so that the first day in the office where she came in, her photo ID matched what was in the turnstile system to let her in. So they went to great lengths to do the training and get the organization ready. And so not every organization has the budget that a Goldman does to help someone in transition, but I thought it was a great piece that the Times wrote about how beautifully they handled it. So again, there's a spectrum of how companies are ready to handle it. There's a spectrum of how generations are ready to handle different areas of diversity and inclusion. But I think it's about accepting who's in your organization and just coming up with a plan based on that.
Wonderful. I think I'm going to put that article in the show notes. I'm going to put the ginger person in the show notes.
Great.
I can absolutely see folks taking what you just described, and like maybe it's the ginger person, or maybe it's the New York Times article, just like some examples in there, say, look, here's a framework to start the conversation. And I feel like that's a great place to begin. I think that's really quite wonderful. Would you be able to, without naming any names,
Sure.
of course, but I'd love to hear of an example of how an organization overcame maybe a problematic issue, diversity or inclusion, and how you worked through that, or how you saw them work through it, and how it became a success story instead of a pain point.
So I think that I recently worked with an executive who had someone on his team going through a transition. And he reached out to the employee's direct supervisor and kind of guided the supervisor through the process. After she had just closed it, she wasn't sure how to respond. She said, I have positive intent, but I'm so nervous. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm kind of walking on eggshells. And so what they did was they brought in one of these gender experts to help that supervisor of the person who was going through transition do and say things that just felt more appropriate, because what was happening was the supervisor literally was saying nothing, not saying anything specific to the person who was going through this transition, not really able to support the team. And I applauded the HR department for saying, this supervisor is sensational, like one of the best, CTOs we have, but this is just a blind spot. And boy, do we need to get ready for it to make sure that it is a positive experience for the whole organization. So that comes to mind. And what comes to mind again is this Goldman article. So after their leader, Maeve, shared her transition, her colleagues had sent her cards, offered makeup tips, and even the commodities team sent a note saying, we are full of genuine admiration and respect for the bravery and your choice to be happy. And I thought that was really something, right? So here, the organization had just had so much support in place, and then it came just about, there was so much support in place for the leadership team to get ready, that then they just kind of focused on the human, and they were just like all about helping me feel comfortable and congratulating. So I thought that was a really good example. And I'm always struck when I trade emails with friends at Squarespace that the pronoun preferences started showing up for them. I think it was about a year ago. And I was like, I've never seen this before. And now more and more, I'm starting to see that. I'm starting to see that on LinkedIn rather, when people post different things about work, posting their pronoun preferences. So I think that there is a lot of great change that is unfolding. But you said something earlier, which is really about creating the space where people can have honest conversations. And I think you can also start it by saying, thanks for being gentle with me. Like, I just want to do the right thing. And I'm sure I'm going to trip over some of this, but like, just know, I just want to be as supportive as I can. Like, just to be so human, like you would just talk to anyone else in your life, just saying, I want to get this right. And apologies in advance if I trip over one of the pronoun references when we're chatting. And after a while, I think people just get used to it. But just being really honest, I think. And what I will share with you in closing, Jason, is that, we've received calls from two ends of the spectrum. We've received a call from an organization saying, we had someone go through transition. That person did not feel that they were treated well. It actually resulted in a lawsuit. And we actually need to come in and do an investigation to understand more of what happened. And on the other end of the spectrum, we received a call from an organization that said, we have someone who's about to go through a transition. We want to get ready and make it as comfortable as possible for everyone. Can you help us prepare? And I thought, well, this is fantastic, because it is so much less expensive to get prepared than to deal with a lawsuit. I mean, who wants to deal with a lawsuit? Life is too short to deal with lawsuits. Let's be proactive rather than reactive.
I love that. This has been so interesting and helpful. And I think of all the different, the folks, like you said, leadership, HR, communications, marketing, PR, the good intentions, the desire to share the message, to advocate this welcoming and the D part of it, but also to really start to understand how they can go after the I aspect and keep
Yes.
their wonderful people on staff, and
Yes.
do the things that the hard work, if you will, inside to make sure that the space is comfortable. And I love the just being transparent, understanding that we're human beings. I am a professional at tripping up and saying the wrong thing, so I completely empathize with that. And I guess my last and final question is the same question I ask everyone, which I love to ask. Is there anything fun that you're working on today that you want to talk about?
Gosh, how much time do you have? Let's see. Well, the one thing that we're so energized by, and I think I mentioned this earlier, we've received, so there is this wonderful program that PricewaterhouseCoopers has called the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. And over 750 CEOs have signed it, saying that they are committed to doing unconscious bias training, being more aware of blind spots, etc. So what has happened a lot over the last year and a half is we've gotten a lot of calls from their heads of HR saying, can you come in and do unconscious bias training literally for 3,000 employees? And can we start with a session for our leadership team and to bring together this group that historically has spent so much time in these boardrooms together, but has never really spoken about, picture the iceberg, what's below the waterline, and um, their own life story and their own bias and the roots of that and the lens through which they look at has been transformative. Because each of these leaders oversee hundreds and hundreds of people, and you think of the positive impact that they can have with this new heightened awareness. So I'm really energized around studying these D&I strategies and, of course, the unconscious bias training that comes with that. The other thing that I love that we're up to is that with more and more organizations expanding the time that parents can take off for parental leave, we're doing a ton of work to fill in those open roles. You can, if you have a colleague out for work, you can, for 3 months, you can kind of like each do a job and a half and hold it together. But now with companies letting parents be out for 6 months, 9 months, it's a long period of time. So we go in and kind of fill in those roles, and the person comes back and their role's tied up with a bow. So that feels really mission driven, because I think that is all part of this puzzle of helping both working parents have a soft landing when they decide to either start or expand their family. So I feel really energized. Both of these pieces of work have a lot of soul to them, and they're very focused on creating really inclusive workplaces, which is a big part of our mission. So yeah, that's what I find energizing. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thanks for asking.
Oh, thank you. And I think this is such an interesting topic. I love that we're actually doing it after June, in representation of 365, not just one
Yeah.
time a year. Let's have this conversation now,
Yes.
and continue to have the conversation. So, Jaime, thank you so much for your time. This has been
Absolutely.
absolutely wonderful. And I look forward to another session with you, hopefully in the not so distant future.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. We've got a ton of great content that covers the full journey of deploying a branded employee app. Go to staffbase.com, click on resources, and select Employee App Guide. That's it. Best wishes, and back to the show.